Hello and welcome to today's video, where we'll be discussing the differences between Warhammer and Dungeons & Dragons. First, let's define both games. Warhammer is a tabletop miniature wargame set in a dystopian future, 40,000 years in the future, well 38,000 years in the future, where players control armies of soldiers, vehicles and other units in a strategic and tactical battle against each other. It's a physical game. It's known for its detailed miniature models, which some people paint to an incredible standard, and its complex gameplay mechanics. Although, if you do nip down to your local game store, it's designed to be made a bit more beginner friendly these days. Dungeons & Dragons, on the other hand, is a tabletop role-playing game, where players take on the role of characters in a fantasy world and work together in a party to complete quests or overcome challenges. It's guided by a person called the Game Master or the Dungeon Master, often known as the DM, who serves as the narrator and referee of the game. One major difference between the two games is the setting. Warhammer takes place in a dark, often called grim dark, futuristic world where humanity is locked in a never-ending war against a variety of alien and heretical forces. Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy game, taking place in a world of magic, mythical creatures and medieval-like technology. It can be set in a grim dark environment or a horror environment, but often is set in a bright environment where players are heroes and are able to accomplish their goals. Warhammer is not a setting that is particularly optimistic. Another difference is the focus of gameplay. In Warhammer, players control armies and engage in strategic battles against one another on a tabletop. The rules are designed to resolve combat between particular units or individual models, rather than in Dungeons & Dragons, where players work together as a team to complete quests and overcome challenges in a narrative-driven experience. Individual characters make dice rolls to determine whether their individual is able to accomplish something or is willing to be able to do something. Another aspect that sets the two games apart is the use of miniatures and terrain. Warhammer is known for its detailed miniature models and elaborate terrain pieces, which are used to represent units and terrain on the battlefield. You can't play Warhammer, well, with the exception of online games and computer games and the many franchised parts of it, you can't play traditional Warhammer 40,000 without physically having models and physically having a table and another player to compete against. Dungeons & Dragons doesn't typically use miniatures or terrain, instead relying on verbal descriptions and maps, often called the theatre of the mind, to represent the game world. Though some dungeon masters introduce physical miniatures and models, others will use online resources to create what's called a virtual tabletop. Both games also have their unique systems for character creation and gameplay. Warhammer uses a points-based system to build armies, where you select a certain number of units that cost different amounts of points perhaps, and you equip them in a certain way, but you select them from a standardized set of offers which are available and provided by the rules of the game. So if I have an Ultramarines army, I have an Ultramarines rulebook that tells me what units I can take, how much points they cost, and how much it would cost for me to upgrade them in certain ways. I then use that to create my army list, and so does my opponent, using their appropriate rules, and then we use those armies to play the game. Conversely, Dungeons & Dragons uses a system called D20. We did a video about this, just doing a brief introduction to it earlier, but it's primarily based on rolling a 20-sided dice where each player has what's called a character sheet that describes the skills, abilities, talents, and capabilities of their character. Ultimately, the choice between Warhammer and Dungeons & Dragons isn't binary. You can play both. If you like strategic, miniature-based wargames, and maybe you also like narrative-driven role-playing games. Do you like the idea of controlling an army? And do you like the idea of taking on the role of a single character? Perhaps you like the idea of physically painting miniatures en masse to be able to take and play and, in some ways show off to other people who've done the same thing? Or do you like the idea of sitting and telling stories with your friends? These are some of the factors that can help you decide on which game is right for you, or maybe it's both. I've definitely played both, and I love both of the games. I love the lore of Warhammer 40,000, it's so rich, and I love how Dungeons and Dragons allows you to play with your friends and build a communal experience. They're definitely distinct in some ways, but they're also incredible communities with an incredible history and passion behind them. I hope this video has helped shed some light on the differences between Warhammer and Dungeons and Dragons. Please hit that subscribe button and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.